Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today for my card making 101 video. Today I'm going to be focusing on inks, the different types of inks and what they are used for in card making. So I'm not going to cover distress inks, I'm going to use them in a different video, but I am going to cover dye inks, pigment inks, hybrid inks, ombre inks, chalk ink, whole different inks, and show you what they look like, what the different properties are and what they are useful for. So the first ink that I'm going to talk about is dye ink. I've got a couple of different colours of dye ink. I've got the Simon Says stamp, this is the full ink pad. With dye inks you'll tend to find that they have a raised, quite a firm felt ink pad, and that's the same whether you get the full size or the minis, and both work in exactly the same way, and I'll show you each of those in just a second. So one of the properties of dye ink is that it takes a little while for it to actually soak into the paper. It actually dyes the paper. So when you first stamp it might look a little bit splotchy and a little bit patchy, but as it dries and it soaks into the fibres of the paper you'll find that you get a really smooth impression. So I'm just inking up my stamp here, and I like to do that by pressing my stamp into the ink pad until I've got a nice even coverage, and you'll find that the ink tends to pool on top of the stamp, and then I'll press that down firmly, and you can see here that it's actually slightly darker than the dried colour, and it's also a little bit splotchier. This just tends to be one of the properties of dye inks. They seem to be touch dry really quickly, however they do take a long time to fully dry into the paper, so there's no risk of you smudging or smearing them after you've stamped. However, it will take quite a while for that patchiness to fade as the ink sinks into the paper. So I've stamped that here with the 3 Simon Says stamp dye ink pads, and you can see it is a little bit splotchy, it's not quite the same colour, and this is another reason why it's really useful to have ink swatch templates of your inks, so you can stamp everything down and let it dry, and then you can see what that true colour looks like. Now for these Altenew inks, these are a dye ink also, but these are described as crisp inks, and one of the reasons is that you get a really crisp, clean, stamped image right from the get-go. The quality of the ink after it's dried is very similar to the Simon Says stamp inks, however you just get more of a crisp image straight away, so if you like to see what things are going to look like right away, that is useful, but you can see again it does tend to stamp a little bit darker in each of the colours, and as they dry that will fade back to the true colour. Now with these inks they tend to be quite, they are translucent, so when you stamp them down onto black cardstock you don't really see much. You can sort of see a little bit of the colour, but not so much on a dark cardstock. You might get a slightly better result if you use maybe like a dark grey or a navy, but certainly on black cardstock you're not going to see much there. Okay, so there's some close-ups of the dye inks, and this is just after I've finished, so I haven't allowed that ink to dry, just to make sure you could see. So now I'm going to show you some pigment inks. Again, I've got a couple of different sizes of pigment inks. One of the really great things about these inks is that they're almost like a paint, so they tend to be on more of a spongy pad, and as you put the ink onto your stamp it's almost like a paint. You get a really good coverage. They do take a very long time to dry, so after you've stamped them down there is a risk that you're going to smudge the ink. However, you get a really nice, you can see how glossy that is, it's very wet. So you can heat set it if you want to, and that will speed up the drying time quite considerably, or you could use a clear embossing powder over the top and then heat that, and that's another good idea. These inks will work on dark cardstock, and with pigment inks they can also have some really interesting qualities as well. So these two that I've got towards the left hand side, that green and copper colour, they've actually got quite a lot of shimmer within the ink. So pigment inks, really inexpensive. You can also get them in a whole load of colours, the same as you can with all of these inks really, to be honest. However, these inks tend to have some extra properties such as shimmer effects in them as well. So I think the pigment inks were probably the first ink that I ever used. They tend to be the really inexpensive inks that you can buy sort of in children's sets and things. They tend to be pigment inks with that spongy foam pad. I still have a lot of them in my collection, particularly these ones with the shimmer and the shine, and I think that both are really useful for your card making for different reasons. Again, this is great because you can stamp on the darker cardstock. And also you tend to get a really good impression even on a solid stamp. Okay, so moving on to hybrid inks, as the name suggests, these are a hybrid mix between a dye and a pigment ink. So they have some of the great properties of dye ink, some of the great properties of pigment ink. I've got a couple of different brands here, and again, I've got full-sized ink pads and mini cubes just to show you that, they work in exactly the same way. So sometimes it's a little bit more cost effective to use to build up your collection with the mini inks rather than the full size. But they work really similar. So these will ink up on your stamp really well. They've got almost like that like paint-like quality with the way that the ink sits on top of the stamp, and it will stamp down slightly splotchy. It will take a long time to dry like the pigment ink, and it will soak into the cardstock and smooth out like a dye ink. So there's a couple examples there using hybrid inks. Now for some chalk inks. So these are just some mini little like cat eye chalk inks that I've got, and I'll just show you how they stamp down. They're more similar to a pigment ink. So again, these have got like that spongy pad for when you're inking up your stamp, and they stamp down really solid, really clean. But they have like a really nice chalky finish, as again the name would suggest with a chalk ink. So they have that really nice sort of smooth chalk-like finish, and I'll show you that in a close-up in just a minute. As you can see with the black cardstock below, you can stamp these onto black cardstock and you will be able to see the ink. It will look like it's a slightly different colour when it's on the black cardstock compared to the white. So chalk inks are quite new to me. I actually got these just so I'd be able to share this in the video and see what they were like, and I really like how they turned out, and I'm looking forward to using them on a project. So now I've got some archival inks. I've got a black ink and then some coloured inks as well. And archival inks are great because they are, they're waterproof, so they're great for whenever you're going to do some watercolouring. They're a permanent ink, they're fade resistant, they're very sort of a permanent ink, so they're good for like art projects that you're going to have on display, or really great for watercolouring. So they stamp down really well. You'll get really good coverage with an archival ink, and again it will stamp slightly darker and soak into the cardstock to the true colour. So the next ink type that I'm going to show you isn't necessarily an ink type, it's more just a change in how the ink pad's been put together. So rather than have one solid ink pad with one colour, this is actually three separate sections of an ink pad, going from darker to lighter in different shades of the same colour. So this one here is like an orange, and you'll see that instead of just pressing straight down when you ink up your stamp, you have to do this little like backwards and forwards cha-cha-cha, and that's how you get a nice smooth blend of the colour across your stamp. So it stamps down really nicely, and you don't just have like three solid sections of colour. So these are dye inks, so they sort of pool on top of the stamp instead of sitting there like a paint, and then they'll fade in. So this ink pad's really cool. This is actually different colours, so rather than like an ombre or a gradient of colour, this is actually just different colours next to each other. And you click the stamp pad together like I just showed you, and then you pull it apart when you store it so the inks don't blend into each other while it's sitting on your shelf. And again, you just do that little backwards and forwards cha-cha-cha to make sure the colours blend nicely on top of the stamp. I don't know why I've just left that there to close the ink pad. I think I was maybe giving the ink a second to soak into the cardstock. But there we go. So that is the ombre inks, and you can get these in a whole bunch of different colours. So now I'm going to show you Versafine. Versafine is a pigment ink, however I wanted to show you it separately because it's one of my favourite inks for stamping sentiments. If you haven't already seen my video discussing different types of black ink, then I do show all of the different black inks that I've got and the different properties that they have and what I use them for in another video. And I've also got a chart that you can download for reference as well, and it tells you which inks are good for like watercolouring or Copics, which ones give a good impression, and so on and so forth. So now I've got my white inks. I've got this white ink from Simon Says Stamp, and I've also got a white ink to the right there, which has got some shimmer in it. I'm stamping them on white. You can't really see all that much on the white cardstock, but I figured I'd keep it consistent and show you what it looks like. But these are really great for stamping onto coloured cardstock. There's so many techniques you can do with a white ink. You can do like shadow stamping, where you stamp the white down and then you shift your stamp slightly, to the left and up, and then stamp down using a coloured ink, and it gives a really great effect. And you can do that on a white cardstock if you want, because you can make out the ink, or you can do that on a coloured cardstock and it looks really beautiful. So these two inks are pigment inks, and I think with a white ink you have to have a pigment ink really to get that good solid impression of the ink. If you want a really bright white, the best thing to do is actually to use white embossing powder. Okay, so you may have noticed that there's a couple of ink types that were missing from this video. One of them would be an embossing ink. Most people tend to use Versamark, and this is just a clear sticky ink that takes a long time to dry, and it's really great for holding your embossing powder. I also haven't covered glue ink pads. This is something you might have seen me use in my videos before. It's a felt pad that you squeeze some glue on the top of, and then you use it like you would a normal ink pad. The only difference is you sort of re-ink it, so to speak, with glue each and every time that you use it. I also haven't talked about StazOn ink. StazOn ink is a type of ink that works really well on slick surfaces such as acetate. So I have it in a white and a black. These are solvent inks, and with the white in particular you do have to re-ink that each time you use it, so when you buy the ink pad it does come with a re-inker. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video and you've learned something about the different types of inks that are available to you in card making and different ways that you can use them and the different properties that they have. If you have any questions, then please leave them in the comments section below, and if you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, then let me know by giving me a thumbs up, leaving me a comment, and if you're not already, I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you again soon for another card making video or a crafting 101 video. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the end of the video. On screen right now are 2 more videos that I think you might enjoy, so if you haven't already watched them, then go ahead and click on the thumbnails and that will take you straight to the videos, or you can click on the links in the description below. If you haven't already, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.